speaker, which is Mayor Jeffrey Savin, who will be testifying virtually. Mayor Savin, you have 2 minutes for your testimony, which begins now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Jeffrey Savin. I'm the mayor of the town of Somerset. Our residents and many citizens in our part of the county have serious concerns about this legislation. First, it cuts residents' voices out of the cell tower siting process. As you know, the antenna on existing structure standard is a limited use standard. Under the standard, residents will receive no notice of any kind before the installation of cell tower antennas on utility poles right in front of their homes. They will have no ability to appeal the siting on the basis of safety or anything else. Secondly, as you know, in August of last year, the DC Circuit Court severely reprimanded the FCC on the issue of radiation emission standards. As part of its opinion in EHT versus FCC, the court stated that the FCC demonstrated, quote, a complete failure to respond to comments concerning environmental harm caused by RF radiation, unquote. This environmentally conscious council should not ignore this fact. In fact, as you know, it was this council which first challenged the FCC. This council just 3 years ago sued the FCC for failing to do its job. In Montgomery County versus FCC, this council stated, as thousands of these transmitters will be densely packed into residential areas and public spaces, citizens began to ask their local officials whether these installations will be safe. Municipalities like petitioner Montgomery County looked to the FCC for answers. While the commission adopted RF exposure standards in 1996, these are now almost 25 years old and are based on scientific knowledge available at the time. Since then, an extensive amount of research has been conducted, RF, that raises concerns about other serious health effects. The council should wait to pass this legislation until after the FCC has answered its own concerns and those of the DC Circuit. I appreciate very much this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mayor Savin, for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Laura Simon, who will also be testifying virtually. Ms. Simon, you may begin your testimony now.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I am opposed to this bill because I don't believe that cell towers belong on our front lawns, just 30 feet from our front door or any part of our home. And I don't believe that the residents do either. Every resident and every citizen I've spoken to in the county thinks I'm absolutely crazy that I would suggest that the Montgomery County Council would allow cell towers on our front lawns. They think it's the craziest thing I've ever said. So I think if you do push this through and allow just 30 feet from our homes cell towers, I think it's going to be really interesting when the trucks come plowing through tens of thousands of cell towers on our lampposts, on our utility poles. If you think that the residents are just gonna lie down and be like, oh, thank you for all this radiation, I think that you have another thing coming. And I also think that you know very well that your lawyers have said that there might be a danger here, and we have to look at that. As far as I've looked at your at the bill, and I've seen that the your office of Legislative Social Oversight, when looking at racial equity, has also brought up that there's research on suppressing immune system, on childhood leukemia, and other issues, which makes it impossible to say whether this is to actually take a side on racial equity on this issue. And I have a niece who's 4. She's been dealing with childhood leukemia since she was 2. Are you going to let her family know what you're putting on her front lawn? Are you going to tell her what exactly the cell tower is, what type of radiation, how she might be able to protect her child, help her sell her home? I think these are things that need to be thought through before you put cell towers right on our front lawns. Tens of thousands. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Deborah Norris, who will be testifying virtually. You may begin your testimony now.
Thank you, Mayor, council members, and other guests. My name is Dr. Deborah Norris. I spent my career as a regulatory neuroscientist. I was the lead neuroscientist, neurotoxicologist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I served in other regulatory agencies as well, such as the FDA, the CDC, the National Institute of Health, even the OECD, where I developed the guidelines for developmental neurotoxicity. I conducted research on electroencephalography, that is, the electromagnetic fields that emanate from our brain. I'm heartened to hear the testimony of our mayor and Ms. Simon. I concur and I agree, and I think I represent the science behind what their concerns are. I'm well aware that our brains, indeed every cell in our body, functions via finely tuned electromagnetic waves, and that these radio frequency EMFs that will be emitted from these towers interfere with the function of our brains, indeed the function of every cell in our body, and are increasing the incidences of cancer and other diseases. Perhaps you have noticed that your own or your loved one's memory is slipping, or that your cognitive functions are not quite as sharp as they used to be. These are the results of such EMFs. Our brains and our hearts function in a range of about 1 to 100 hertz. Within that range, we experience many states of consciousness, awareness, and emotions. Outside the range, we are disoriented and confused. Our cells stop functioning, we develop cancer and other diseases. Our children are born with other conditions, health conditions as well. The purpose of our government regulation should be to protect our health and that of our environment. As Mayor Savin mentioned, Jewish values of tikkun olam, acts of kindness to perfect or repair the world. You must rule by the precautionary principle to first do no harm. Make no allowances for further encroachment until these devices are proven without any doubt to be safe. Move them back. Indeed, reverse last year's ruling to move them from approximately 300 to 60 feet, move them back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Rick Meyer, who will be testifying virtually. Mr. Meyer, you may begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Meyer, and I speak in opposition to ZTA 2201 because this CCA seeks to accommodate inadequacies and weaknesses of millimeter wave technology and is simply no longer needed. We repeatedly heard demands from two wireless carriers that invested billions in millimeter wave frequency auctions that they must be granted access to residential rights of way to deploy millimeter wave with very short setbacks. So the council passed ZTA 1802 in 2018 and opened the barn door for access to more than 33,000 eligible utility and streetlight poles to attach wireless antennas as in limited use in public rights-of-way inside residential zones, so long as the existing pole was 60 feet from the nearest dwelling. So given the urgent industry imperative, how many applications from wireless companies have actually been submitted in the 4 years since the passage of ZTA 1802 for first-time antenna co-locations on poles in residential zones? 33. That's it. 33 in 4 years with an eligible pool of 33,000 poles. By contrast, we're also seeing the rapid deployment of C-band technology in Montgomery County, which travels farther, goes through foliage better, and penetrates walls. So another statistic, how many applications have there been for rooftops, water towers, monopoles, and lattice towers where C-band is typically deployed since 2018? 766 versus 33. Believe me, this technology is becoming, millimeter wave technology is becoming obsolete, and this ZTA seeks to accommodate something that is no longer being used by the wireless industry. ZTA 2201 is superfluous and gratuitous. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Robert Janku.
My name is Robert Janku. I want Montgomery County to be a leader in telecommunications by showing how we can have the excellent communications without altering neighborhoods. Fiber to all premise. Industry has moving to longer range 5G signals outside of residential areas. I'm disappointed with how council members refuse to meet with constituents, reduced our speaking time from 3 minutes to 2, one making up total fantasies about health, one talk down to residents, misrepresenting the role of Mrs. Nadeau Esquire. Her client is the Fed committee and in particular the chair. She isn't presenting balanced information. She advocates for cell towers. It is total nonsense that Montgomery County is required to place cell towers in residential rights of way. Gaithersburg has banned cell towers in their residential rights away. They did it. Congress writes laws, FCC transforms laws into regulations. Circuit courts adjudicate any disagreements. Court decisions are final. FCC has no right to change court decisions. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit rejected FCC's material innovation standard. Clear Wireless versus Village of Lynbrook. Extenet versus Village of Flower Hill. The effective prohibition stands unchanged. You need to invite Andrew Campanelli or Scott McCall to speak. Both are nationally recognized telecommunications lawyers. There's no legal or technical need for 2001. Don't waste your time on it. Setbacks from residential housing. Bar Harbor, Maine, 1,500 feet. Copay, New York. Salvasar, Oklahoma, Walnut City. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Sue Present. You are on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Sue Present. Please reject CTA 2201. It threatens residents and neighborhoods. For example, this CTA triggers an FCC mandate, which forces street pole owners to accept antennas on their poles in our neighborhoods. For safety, the antennas go on replacement poles, which are taller and larger than pre-existing poles. Utility poles get replaced before antenna applications are reviewed or even submitted, and with no notice before DPS issues permits and the pole work commences, neighbors are blindsided. Neighbors are stuck with these replacement poles even when the antenna applications don't get approved. Neighbors are stuck with double poles too, because pre-existing utility poles languish for years after replacement poles have been installed. Double poles obstruct visibility and are deadly roadway hazards, and tree foliage gets removed from a radius of up to 15 feet around replacement poles and their electrical wires, diminishing health, comfort, and home energy affordability. OLO ignored reduced setback effects in the RESJ evaluation, but CTA 2201 poses disparate adverse impacts on persons of color and residents with lower incomes. These are persons who more frequently live in houses on smaller lots and with shorter front foot setbacks compared to the county's population at large in zones affected by the ZTA. OLO echoes the claim that this ZTA aligns with ZTA 1907's regulations. That's false. Utility poles and government streetlight poles are exempt. Essentially, as Mr. Reamer intended, ZTA's regulations regarding these street poles are impotent. Please reject ZTA 2201. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Susan Lehman.
Hello, I'm Susan Lehman, PhD, and I am opposed to ZTA 2201. I have 6 issues for today. First, I ask each council member to consider whether you are acting as a public servant or as a politician positioning for your next job or committee assignment. Is this another industry debacle like tobacco and opiate travesties, but even larger? How do the lobbyists and the constant barrage of 5G advertising affect each of you? You are accountable for your conscience and for upholding your oath of office. You don't have to agree with all of us, but you do have a fiduciary duty to find solutions that respect residents' interests. Rather than treating us as obstacles, think of us as your resources and partners. In the Environmental Health Trust versus the FCC, the court resoundingly criticized the FCC. The FCC was arbitrary and capricious. I urge the council not to act in the same manner. What problem are you solving? Wired internet is almost universally available in Montgomery County. Wired is 50 times cheaper, far faster, more reliable, more secure, uses less energy, and allows for wireless in one's home. Where are the county's climate and economic assessments? As per congressional testimony, 5G will not solve the digital divide. As for social justice, 2201 will disproportionately affect the vulnerable. The electrosensitivity is a medical diagnosis protected by ADA. What about the county's legal exposure for costs from dislocation, harm, and even deaths for thousands of residents? Hundreds of thousands of residents may be affected by 2201. This is not a trivial administrative correction. Vote your conscience. Please cancel all action and vote no on 2201.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Susanna Goodman.
Hi there. My name is Susanna Goodman. I'm from Chevy Chase. So last summer, this council passed very permissive legislation allowing cell towers everywhere throughout the county. Then just days after that, the DC Circuit issued an opinion which threw into question the safety of all of those towers. They were responding to a case litigated by the Environmental Health Trust with amicus from the Natural Resources Defense Council. The FCC, which sets cell tower radiation standards, is now under court direction to show that its cell tower radiation standards are adequate. Therefore, this legislation is premature. Let's not ignore what the DC Circuit Court said about the FCC. In its opinion, the court cited a complete failure to respond to comments concerning environmental harm caused by RF radiation, end quote. The FCC has been directed to, quote, address the impacts of RF radiation on children, the health implications of long-term exposure, and the impacts of radiation on the environment. The FCC has not yet responded to this very serious reprimand from the DC Circuit Court. We sincerely hope this council will not give short shrift to the opinion of the second highest court in the land. Until the FCC has answered the DC Circuit Court, this council should not put the public at greater risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Theodore Guerrado.
Thank you. This CTA is not about harmonization. It's a corporate land grab, cutting people out of the decision-making process. It's also inaccurate to say that federal agencies such as the FDA, NCI, CDC, or EPA are ensuring cell tower radiation safety. There simply has been zero up-to-date research reviews of the totality of the science, not by any federal agencies, none. No one is actually watching the store. Cell tower radiation exemplifies the concept of a regulatory gap. There was no pre-market safety testing, no post-market surveillance. There's no risk analysis for long-term health effects by the feds, not then, not now, none planned. And yet there's an ever-accumulating body of independent science showing harmful effects and no end to industry-funded experts promoting the false narrative that transmitting cell antennas 30 feet from our homes is somehow safe. When it comes to the ambient tower radiation, there is no federal agency with public health or environmental expertise who is monitoring the levels or ensuring that the public and environment is protected. Now, because of our winning court case against the FCC has been ordered to respond to the scientific evidence, as has been explained, showing long-term harm to children's brain development and harm to birds, bees, and trees, which is not only was it completely ignored by the FCC, but the limits were never, ever designed to even protect them. The FCC hasn't responded, and therefore, those exposure limits cannot be understood to rest on an up-to-date review. However, the well-funded astroturfing, greenwashing, and false promises that 5G will bridge the digital divide rests on smoke and mirrors. Allowing cell antennas 30 feet from our homes is reckless. Cell tower radiation is literally defined as a type of pollution by the wireless companies themselves. Insurance companies rate 5G as high risk, and they won't insure telecoms for health damages. And that's why telecoms warned their shareholders, but not us, the people living.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Colleen Courts.
Speaking for Community Division for Tacoma, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Could you start the clock again?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Please resist a false rationale for why CTA 2201 is no big deal, why it can be quietly rushed through. No, it's not just a technical fix of CTA 1907. Evidence shows there was no accidental technical mistake in the final language of 1907. Way back in January 2020, the Council's own staff told the Fed committee, which Mr. Reamer chairs, in a memo that 1907 would not change part of county zoning code that governs existing utility poles, the part of code that 2201 deals with. Council staff repeatedly included that fact in memos to Mr. Reamer's committee and the full council. The county executive, in written comments to you a month before you passed 1907, also noted it. So Mr. Reamer and the full council were informed several times over the year and a half before you passed 1907. 2201 cannot be honestly characterized as correcting an accidental oversight in that law. This is an entirely new proposal. And what 2201 proposes is not a minor change. It's a big deal for the huge number of residents who don't want cell towers on poles 30 feet from their bedroom windows. In fact, it would be a major change in county zoning law, not something the outgoing council should rush to pass just before your terms end. We urge you to cancel all action on 2201. Encourage the incoming council to thoroughly review all zoning and regulation of wireless facilities. One priority, correct the out-of-control situation with rooftop antennas on multifamily residential buildings. Many, if not most, of these buildings are in residential zones affected by this proposed ETA. If passed, residents in these buildings may find new pole antennas beaming into their windows in addition to antennas over their heads. No one will monitor any of them. Why is no one making sure residents are not being illegally exposed to radiation levels that exceed federal safety limits? That's the kind of fix we need, not 2201. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Anna Olson.
Hi, my name is Anna Olson and I'm opposed to ZTA 2201. Why are you pushing for fast-tracking the rollout of 5G antennas when there are so many reasons to slow down? Why would you push this CTA at a time when we're experiencing the beginnings of what may be the most significant energy crisis in our lifetimes? While we are trying to figure out how to use less energy in the interest of the environment, you want to open the floodgates for the telecom industry to blanket our county with 30,000 5G antennas, each of which uses at least twice as much power as their 4G predecessors? Why? Telecom hired analysts are already telling their clients to prepare for significantly higher energy bills as a result of 5G deployment. Who do you think they're going to make pay for that? Your actions, unleashing what to them is nothing but an unlimited opportunity for more profit, will lead to skyrocketing energy use, skyrocketing electricity prices, and we will all pay for that. Why are you pushing so hard for this now? If you truly cared about climate impact, wouldn't it make sense to postpone a decision on this and have a climate impact assessment done once it becomes required on January 1st, as per your own unanimous vote? What makes your actions even more difficult to understand is that we don't need 30,000 5G antennas to be well connected. As you must be aware of, there's actually a cheaper, faster, vastly more energy efficient solution to providing connectivity to all residents. Finish building out the fiber optic network that we've all been paying for over the last several years through added taxes on our phone bills. The fact that you're ignoring this opportunity while stubbornly pushing more and more invasive ZTAs could not make it any clearer who you truly represent through your actions, the telecom industry. We see what you're doing, and we will hold you accountable. Abolish ZTA 1907 and 2201 and start regulating the telecom corporations. Uphold your oath of office and start to serve and protect your constituents. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Michelle Bailey.
Good day. I'm Michelle Bailey from Silver Spring. I'm opposed to ZTA 2201. Contrary to what Mr. Reamer has repeatedly said about how everyone has wireless networks and devices all around their homes, there are many, many people in our county, including myself and my family, who have created wireless-free zones using exclusively wired high fiber, high-speed networks. 3 years ago, we were forced to move from our wonderful home that happened to sit in the center of the radiation cone from over 40 cell antennas mounted on a high-rise across the street. After careful searching and moving twice in 1 year, we now live in a radiation-free home, and we have largely recovered from the many negative health effects that we were suffering from our previous home, including insomnia, heart palpitations, severe headaches, ear ringing, and worsening thyroid disease, all of which, by the way, have been documented in peer-reviewed scientific studies as effects of living in constant 24/7 RF radiation. The so-called science that the lead sponsor of the ZTA constantly refers to comes from Gerald Bushberg, a well-known industry consultant at Crown Castle and wireless companies going back decades. As Theodore Guerrado has already explained, we are still waiting for the FCC to justify or provide a reasoned explanation based on the science for its RF limits. By enacting ZTA 2201, you are actively taking away our right to choose to live in a healthy home by giving telecom corporations free rein to put a cell antenna on any utility pole in our county and removing a right to receive prior notice for residents or any right of hearing or appeal. You will be forcing us to live in 24/7 radiation against our will or force us out of our home and the county we love and have called home for 30 years. I urge you to consider the wide-reaching consequences of your actions as you vote on 2201. You are accountable for every single one of them. Do the right thing. Abolish the unneeded and unfair ZTA 2201.
Next, we will hear from Catherine Cateson, who is here in person.
My name is Catherine Katzen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm opposed to ZTA 2201. There is no FCC or federal requirement, no plausible legal justification for ZTA 2201. Nowhere in federal law is it written that 30-foot setbacks are required over 60-foot setbacks. Montgomery County is not and was not vulnerable for liability for a lot of money if it failed to adopt these ZTAs, as some have claimed. The Supreme Court ruled in 2005 that localities cannot be fined or liable for money damages for failing to deploy a cell tower. During the deliberations for ZTA 1907, the council inaccurately characterized City of Portland v. FCC with respect to the effective prohibition standard of wireless services. Section 332, City of Portland, did not address or alter municipalities' rights to determine location of towers. For this section, the Fourth Circuit, whose rulings govern in Maryland, has defined effective prohibition as a total lack of coverage, which is not our situation in Montgomery County, where we already have extensive 4G and 5G coverage. A recent case in the Second Circuit, Extenant v. Flower Hill, found that effective prohibition under sections 253 and 332 applied only to the ability of a wireless telephone to make phone calls to a landline. Nothing more. The federal judge wrote, "It is not up to the FCC to construe the act to say something it does not say." Finally, ZTA 2201 won't prevent proliferation of new poles. Pepco could install a new pole, and then a few weeks later, wireless carriers claim it's an existing structure under 2201. Please vote no on ZTA 2201 and allow the incoming council to consider zoning changes. Thank you.